Cass Elliot took one of her greatest secrets to the grave. What was she hiding? No one knew who the real father of her child was, and only years later did her bandmate Michelle Phillips reveal the truth, and it turned out to be the biggest shock of all. She was the rising star of the mamas and the papas. A woman with a voice so deep, so commanding, it defined an entire generation. But behind the bright lights and thunderous applause lay a far darker story. Unrequited love, humiliating career setbacks, reckless affairs, and dangerous diets. Her battle with her own image haunted her every single day, right up to the very end. Ellen Naomi Cohen, the girl the world would come to know as Cass Elliot, was born in Baltimore in September 1941. Her parents, Jewish immigrants from Russia, struggled to make ends meet. Poverty shaped her childhood. Yet even in hardship, Cass seemed destined for something greater. Her vivid personality, boundless talent, and the spark she carried into every room set her apart from the rest. But with her gift came her demons. From an early age, she struggled with her weight and with the cruel stigma that always followed it. Yet in high school, Cass found her salvation. The theater. The stage gave her strength. It gave her purpose. And soon she created a name that became her armor, Cass Elliot. Cass, after actress Peggy Cass. Elliot, in memory of a friend who had died too young. This was more than a stage name. It was her shield. With her new identity, she set off for New York. Her dream was Broadway, but Broadway could be merciless. One audition changed everything. The role Cass longed for went instead to an unknown young singer named Barbra Streisand. Cass was crushed. Heartbroken, she turned to music, hoping it would love her where theater had rejected her. But music, too, became a battlefield. From 1962 to 1964, Cass formed two groups, the Big Three Dachshunds and then the Mugwumps. It was there she met Denny Doherty, the man she would silently love for the rest of her life. He became her muse, her weakness, her obsession, but fate was cruel. Though she loved Doherty, in 1963 Cass married guitarist James Hendricks. There was no romance. The marriage was simply a practical way to keep him from being drafted into the army. 8 months later, the band fell apart, and so did the marriage. Cass hoped that now Doherty would finally choose her, but instead, he joined a new group. The New Journeymen, led by John and Michelle Phillips. For Cass, it was another door slammed in her face. She wanted in. She wanted to be near Doherty. He admired her talent, but John Phillips was ruthless. He refused to accept her voice, claiming it was too low for his songs, and in private he mocked her looks. To him, Cass was simply too fat to ever be part of the group. But Cass Elliot wasn't about to give up. Rejected and humiliated, she still refused to walk away. She followed the New Journeymen wherever they went, clinging to the hope they would take her in. But what she endured was nothing short of cruelty. They treated her worse than a clingy fan. They barked orders at her, sent her for drinks. Sometimes they let her sing in rehearsals, only to snatch the chance away before any performance. Cass swallowed the humiliation. To her, the dream and the chance to be near Denny was worth any suffering. And then everything changed. The New Journeymen were reckless. They spent more on parties and drugs than on music. Eventually, the money ran out. With nowhere to go, they turned to the only person who had never turned her back on them, Cass Elliot. She opened the doors of her Los Angeles home, but with one condition. Either she became part of the group, or they'd be out on the street. With no other choice, John Phillips finally agreed. Years later, an official version appeared, a neat little legend hiding the truth. According to the tale, Cass was supposedly walking past a construction site in the Virgin Islands when a pipe fell on her head. The blow, they said, magically transformed her voice, giving her the higher range that Phillips wanted to hear. It was a tidy story, but it was a lie. The truth was far simpler. John Phillips hadn't wanted her in the group because of her weight. He only agreed to take her in when he had no other choice. But from rejection and humiliation came triumph. The group changed its name to the Mamas and the Papas. With Cass's voice leading the way, they shot straight to the top of the charts. California Dreamin' Monday, Monday. These weren't just songs. They were the soundtrack of an entire era. At last, Cass was living her dream. But dreams come with a price. The jokes about her weight never stopped. In their hit, Creek Alley, her bandmates even wrote a cruel line: "No one's getting fat except Mama Cass." What began as a cheap joke became her permanent label. The world no longer called her Cass Elliot. She became Mama Cass. And as if the ridicule weren't enough, her heart was breaking. Cass had joined the group for Denny Doherty, but Doherty chose someone else, Michelle Phillips. When Cass discovered their affair, she was devastated. In despair, she told Michelle, "You could have any man in the world. Why take the only one I love?" Her grief was unbearable. She poured it into her music and drowned it with drugs. The pain dragged her into scandals that followed her everywhere. In London, she was even arrested, officially for stealing bedsheets. But behind the scenes, police suspected a connection to a lover who was also dealing drugs. The charges were dropped, but the stain on her reputation remained. Her time with the Mamas and the Papas was running out, and soon Cass decided to strike out on her own. What waited for her next? By the late 1960s, the Mamas and the Papas were falling apart. Behind the harmonies that had made them famous lay betrayals, fights, and broken hearts. For Cass, every song was soaked with the weight of her unreturned love for Doherty and the pain of watching him in Michelle's arms. Tension poisoned the group. John Phillips grew increasingly tyrannical. Michelle cheated not only with Denny but with others. Trust shattered, friendships crumbled, and music could no longer hold them together. By 1968, the band that had defined a generation's sound was finished. For Cass, the end of the Mamas and the Papas was bittersweet. On one hand, she lost the only stage, the only family she had fought so hard to be part of. On the other, it was a chance to step out of the shadow of mockery and finally present herself not as Mama Cass, but as Cass Elliot. Her first solo single was a gamble. She recorded "Dream a Little Dream of Me," a song that seemed too soft, too tender for the big, bold woman the public thought they knew. But the song became a triumph. The audience embraced her. For the first time, Cass was celebrated, not as the punchline of a cruel joke, but as a woman with a voice that could stop time. It seemed Cass was finally free. Free from the group. Free from John Phillips's harsh judgment. Free to reinvent herself. She dreamed of a solo career that would prove she was far more than Mama Cass. But freedom brought new trials. To stand on stage alone, she would have to change not just her career, but her body. And then the lights of Las Vegas called. Caesar's Palace offered Cass a contract, her chance to become a headliner, the star she had always believed she was. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. But for Cass Elliot, it would turn into disaster. For Cass, the Caesar's Palace contract was the embodiment of all her dreams. A solo show in Las Vegas, a stage that was hers alone. A chance to prove she wasn't just the voice of the mamas and the papas, but Cass Elliot, a star in her own right. But with that opportunity came crushing pressure. In an era obsessed with thinness, Cass believed success was only possible if she transformed her body. She embarked on a brutal diet. For 7 long months, she starved herself 4 days a week. She lost nearly a third of her weight. But with the pounds, her strength slipped away as well. By the time she arrived in Las Vegas, Cass was gravely ill. Her voice, once warm, strong, and soaring, was ravaged by tonsillitis, vocal cord hemorrhages, mononucleosis, and even hepatitis. But still, she pressed forward. She couldn't afford to fail. On opening night, the room glittered with stars. Sammy Davis Jr., Jimi Hendrix, Mia Farrow, the biggest names in Hollywood and music had come to witness Cass Elliot's grand debut. The audience was waiting for a miracle. The curtain rose, and there was silence. Cass stepped onto the stage, nervous, frail, exhausted. She tried to sing, but her voice was weak, trembling, little more than a whisper. She could barely hold the notes. Each song chipped away at her confidence. The audience, disappointed and restless, began to walk out. Her contract required 2 shows a night. After a short rest backstage, Cass tried again. But the second performance was even worse. By the end of the evening, Caesar's Palace had made its decision. The contract was terminated immediately. The press was merciless. Newsweek compared her debut to the sinking of the Titanic. For Cass, the humiliation was unbearable. She had sacrificed her health, her happiness, almost her very life for this chance, only to be mocked and crushed in the very city where she'd hoped to rise again. She sank into a deep depression, and yet, even in her darkest days, there was one light that kept her afloat: her daughter. Cass had given birth shortly before signing the Vegas contract, and from the moment she held the baby in her arms, everything changed. No man, no career, no stage could ever mean as much as that tiny life. Cass became fiercely protective, firing nannies as soon as they grew too close, shielding Owen from the press, and building walls of silence around her private life. But the tallest wall was the secret she trusted no one with: the identity of Owen's father. Why did she guard it so fiercely? Not the press, not even her closest friends. It was a secret she carried like a shield. Of course, gossip could never be stopped. The tabloids speculated endlessly, accusing every man Cass had ever known, and then the rumors grew even darker. Cass Elliot was famous for her legendary Hollywood parties. Guest lists sparkled with stars, but in the shadows lurked darker figures. Among those rumored to have appeared at her home was the most infamous name of the era, Charles Manson. No one knows how close Cass truly was to Manson, or if she ever knew him beyond a fleeting encounter at a party. But after the horrific Tate murders, suspicion spread everywhere. Even John Phillips accused Cass of being the one who had brought Manson into their circle. It was a cruel, baseless accusation, but the stain remained. Through it all, Cass clung to her daughter, the one part of her life the world could never corrupt. If her career collapsed, if the public mocked her, she could still be what she most wanted to be, a mother. By 1971, Cass was desperate for stability. For years, she had chased a love that never loved her back. And at last, she thought she had found it. His name was Donald von Wiedenmann, a journalist, heir to a Bavarian title, and, for a brief moment, Cass Elliot's husband. The wedding was quiet, filled with hope, almost like a promise of a new life. But the promise was broken. Barely 2 months later, the marriage collapsed. Another dream disappeared as quickly as it had come. So Cass returned to what she knew best, the stage. She appeared on television, even hosted her own specials, the Mama Cass television program, and Don't Call Me Mama Anymore. But behind the cameras, she was fighting the same old battle. The crash diets never stopped. She punished her body, ignoring every warning sign. By 1974, the warning signs could no longer be ignored. While waiting backstage for The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, Cass suddenly collapsed. Medics rushed to help, but she brushed it off with a joke. "My sugar's just low, I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Not at all. That summer, she flew to London for a 2-week run at the Palladium. On stage, she was radiant, powerful, inspiring, her voice soaring as if nothing could stop it. The concerts were a triumph. For a fleeting moment, it seemed Cass Elliot was invincible again. But backstage, her body was failing. She spent her nights at parties, Mick Jagger's birthday, endless gatherings with friends, late-night celebrations. To those around her, she looked cheerful, but her face grew pale, her breath heavier. She waved it away, just tired. And then, on a quiet July morning in 1974, Cass never woke up. She was only 32. The official cause: heart failure. Her body, weakened by years of punishing diets and relentless pressure, had finally given out. But even in death, the world was cruel. Instead of mourning, the tabloids spread a vicious lie that Mama Cass had choked on a ham sandwich, a cruel joke about her weight that overshadowed her legacy for decades. 4 years later, fate delivered a haunting twist. Keith Moon, the drummer of The Who, died in that very same London apartment. He too was only 32. Cass's daughter Owen was raised by her younger sister, Leah. For many years, the secret of Owen's father remained locked away, sealed by Cass's silence. Until finally, Michelle Phillips revealed the truth. It was guitarist Chuck Day, a twist no one had expected. In 2022, nearly 50 years after her death, Cass Elliot was finally honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. At last, the world paid tribute to her not with mockery, but with remembrance. She was a woman who fought for the right to be heard in an era that judged her body more than her voice. A woman who carried the weight of heartbreak, humiliation, and rejection, and yet still sang with a power no stage could contain. Cass Elliot, a dreamer, a fighter, a legend taken too soon, but her story lives on.